According to South Park, COVID started with a threesome. In another episode, they mock Britney Spears in the midst of her crisis, showing her attempting to take her own life, but she fails and survives. And that's not even the most controversial thing. Because if there's one thing that defines South Park, it's that it holds nothing back. They've made fun of people with disabilities, African Americans, Jews, gays, the poor. They've made jokes about 9/11, the Holocaust, and even God being intimate with Satan. And yet, they haven't been canceled. In a world where people get canceled for any comment on social media, South Park has been on the air for 25 years, unfiltered and unapologetic. So, what is it about this show that makes it untouchable? What's the secret behind its immunity? Could it be that, even though we act proper on the outside, something in us connects with this kind of humor? Could it be that, as uncomfortable as it is, we need a space where people say what's usually left unsaid? Today, we're going to investigate whether South Park is really as cruel as it seems, or if, as awkward as it is to admit, it might be the kind of humor many need to cope with an absurd and painful world. Sam asks for permission to go to the movies with his friends. They're going to see a foreign film from Canada. His mom agrees, and as she watches him walk away, she sighs and says her son is an angel. She's so happy to live in that quiet little town full of good, Christian people. She passes by Kenny, but his mom stops him, yelling, "Where do you think you're going? You have to go to church. If you don't, you'll burn in hell." Even so, the kids manage to sneak out. They come across a homeless man and do what any well-mannered kid in their little town would do: avoid him. They pass by Kyle, and his mom, Sheila, tells them to be careful. The world isn't what it used to be. Then they pick up Carmen, and now the group is complete. They head happily to the movies, where they can learn everything their parents don't have the time or desire to teach them. They ask for tickets to see Terrence and Philip, but there's a problem. It's rated R, and since they're underage, they're not allowed in. So, they do the most logical thing. They offer the homeless man $10 to pretend to be their responsible adult, and it works. The movie is completely inappropriate, with crude jokes and profanity every 2 seconds. And the kids, of course, are thrilled. To them, it's art, as if they've been given access to a forbidden world. They spew profanities with a fluency they didn't even know they had. They meet up with their friends and debut their new language. Everyone is stunned and runs straight to the theater. The next day, the whole school is talking the same way. Profanity in the hallways, at recess, and in class. The moms are called in. They're outraged. Those Canadians have ruined their precious children. The town goes into crisis. The news asks if this movie is destroying the youth, and for some reason, the report is given by a man in a bikini. Sheila, Kyle's mom, becomes the face of the movement. She goes on TV, blaming the Canadians. Canada's Minister of Film responds that the movie wasn't meant for kids, and that, besides, the US's movies 10 times more violent, yet they get scandalized over a few bad words. Sheila ignores him and keeps insisting that Canadians are evil. With all the uproar, the school gives in to the pressure and organizes a rehabilitation program to teach the kids to speak without swearing. They're given an official list of acceptable translations. Instead of saying damn, they should say slippers. Instead of to hell, better to the machine. And if they're going to say no, it should be no way. According to the principal, that's speaking respectfully, and he assures them it will keep the kids away from drugs, bad choices, and jail. The friends leave the rehabilitation program and head straight to the theater to see Terrence and Philip. In one scene, the characters set themselves on fire with a match. Carmen bets Kenny that it doesn't happen in real life. Kenny tries it, and, yes, it happens. He catches fire and dies. With this, the moms find out the kids watch the movie again. They're furious and punish them, not for getting Kenny killed, but for disobeying. South Park is a satire. It's crude, absurd, and politically incorrect, but it's also honest. This type of comedy exaggerates what already exists in reality. Politicians who lie, religions that fall into contradictions, ridiculous trends, healthcare systems that don't work, schools that teach the bare minimum, and the absurdity of human behavior. It mocks all of this, but not just to make us laugh. It's to make us stop and see how illogical, unjust, and contradictory the world can be, to make us question things. In this movie, for example, South Park exposes the double standards of many conservative communities in the US, places that present themselves as very proper, religious, and good, but when you look closely, something doesn't add up. Stan's mom, for instance, is convinced she lives in a town full of good people and that her son is an angel. But seconds later, we saw a homeless man lying on the street, and that little angel paid him $10 to pretend to be his guardian so he could get into the theater. The town isn't that good, nor is her son that saintly, but she prefers to believe they are because admitting otherwise might mean facing problems she doesn't want to see. Maybe recognizing that her son isn't who she thinks would force her to question herself as a mother. Kenny's mom, on the other hand, calls herself very Christian, but when her son wanted to go out, she yelled that if he didn't go to church, he'd burn in hell. Christianity preaches love and compassion, but in that moment, she uses religion as a weapon of control. Then, when the kids started swearing, the whole town panicked. But when Kenny died brutally, no one cared. A bad word shocked them, but a child's death went unnoticed. It's easier to be outraged over a curse word than to face the pain and harshness of that death and ask why their community is like that. And that's the thing. We often get scandalized by superficial things to avoid confronting the deeper, uncomfortable causes. The superficial becomes a scapegoat. It's more comfortable to be outraged because someone said, damn, than to ask why a child dies and no one cares. It's easier to blame Canada for the kids' behavior than to look closely at how they're being raised at home. It's simpler to feel morally superior because the kids speak politely than to question what values are really being taught. Instead of addressing the root problem, the great solution they came up with was to teach the kids to say no way instead of no, or slippers instead of damn. They think that's enough to fulfill their role as parents. But changing a word doesn't change what's behind it. It doesn't make anyone a better person. It's just make up to maintain the illusion that everything's fine. And that's the genius of South Park. While other shows try to address these issues seriously and bore many or make them feel scolded, South Park makes you laugh. And when you laugh, you let your guard down. You don't feel attacked or judged. And in that moment of laughter, you might realize that many of the rules we follow don't make sense, that we ignore serious problems, and that, to some degree, we all have our contradictions. That's why I think, as strange as it sounds, shows like South Park have value. With humor, they force us to look at what we usually avoid. I believe the truly uncomfortable thing isn't the profanity, but the issues that profanity points to. If, after watching the whole movie, the only thing that bothers you is the bad words and not what's behind them, you might be missing the point. You'd be doing the same thing as the parents in the story, getting scandalized by the easiest thing while ignoring what's most important. Later, we'll see that this movie, at its core, is a metaphor for the attacks and censorship South Park has faced for years. And now a question remains. Is it okay to make fun of everything? Are there things we should never joke about? Or is that exactly where we need to laugh the most? We'll talk about that later. Kenny's soul ascends to heaven, but since he swore and didn't go to church, he's denied entry. The kid ends up in hell, burning. Sheila calls a meeting to find a solution, or rather, to decide who to blame. Some suggest blaming the government, others, society. One person suggests that maybe the blame lies with them, the parents themselves, but Sheila won't allow that. So, without hesitation, she proposes blaming Canada. Everyone loves the idea. They're not even a real country anyway. Thus, the Mothers Against Canada Association is born. They print signs, hand out flyers, and even make t-shirts that say, "Eliminate Canada." When Terrence and Philip appear on a TV show, Sheila bursts in with soldiers and orders their arrest. Canada is outraged and, in response, bombs the house of Alec Baldwin, the Hollywood actor. The U.S. president declares war and announces that Terrence and Philip will be executed. The person in charge of the project will be his new Secretary of Defense, Sheila. Meanwhile, in hell, Kenny wakes up surrounded by fire, screams, and tortured souls. He meets Satan, but instead of being terrifying, he's insecure and submissive. He's in a toxic relationship with Saddam Hussein, the dictator of Iraq. Saddam manipulates him, humiliates him, and mocks him, but Satan doesn't dare confront him. Back on Earth, Carmen tells Kyle that this is all his mom's fault, calling her a Sheila overhears, and Carmen's in trouble. At the next Mothers Against Canada meeting, Sheila announces that everything is ready for the elimination of Terrence and Philip, but she also presents a new solution to stop the kids from swearing, implanting a chip in their brains that gives them an electric shock every time they curse. She shows the first test case. Carmen barely says a curse word, and the chip activates, shocking him. In seconds, he stops swearing. The experiment works, and the moms applaud as if they've just saved the world. Kyle and Stan try to talk to their moms, trying to make them see reason. They can't eliminate Terrence and Philip, but the moms don't listen. They just repeat the same thing over and over. They have to protect their children. They're the most valuable thing they have. They're safeguarding their future. Seeing there's no way to convince them, the kids decide to take matters into their own hands. They form their own movement, the Resistance, and send a message to all the kids in the neighborhood. They have to save Terrence and Philip. Meanwhile, in hell, Kenny spies on Satan and Saddam lying in bed. He overhears them talking about ancient prophecies. If Canadian blood touches American soil, it will unleash the apocalypse, World War III, and the end of the world. Kenny panics, goes up to Earth, and appears to Carmen. He warns him that if Terrence and Philip die, Satan and Saddam will take over the planet. Carmen runs to tell Kyle and Stan, and at the Resistance meeting, they come up with a plan to stop the execution. The event will take place during a special show, full of celebrities and broadcast live across the country. But none of them have any idea how to organize a rescue, so they're given some advice. If they want to pull it off, they need to find the mole. Meanwhile, the U.S. Army prepares to invade Canada. The general starts assigning roles. The 5CO Battalion raises their hands. They're all African-American soldiers. Their role will be crucial. They'll be the human shield. Then it's the turn of the 14th Battalion, made up of white soldiers. Their instruction, stand behind the dark ones. One of the soldiers from the 5th Battalion speaks up. Have you ever heard of the Emancipation Proclamation? The general looks confused and responds, I don't listen to hip-hop. At first glance, this sequence seems like a racist joke. African Americans in front, used as cannon fodder, and whites behind. For some, this kind of humor crosses a line that shouldn't be crossed, but before canceling it, it's worth looking at the context. If we understand where it comes from, we can see that the movie isn't mocking African Americans themselves, but the unfair treatment they've historically received. The joke exaggerates something that, sadly, has happened and that many believe still happens. In many wars and dangerous jobs, those on the front lines were, and often still are, African Americans or Latinos. For example, during the Vietnam War, although African Americans made up only 11% of the U.S. population, they accounted for 25 to 30% of combat soldiers, with higher participation and casualties proportionally. Dr. Martin Luther King even called Vietnam a white man's war and a black man's fight. Something similar happened in the Gulf War. Over 24% of the troops in the Gulf were African American, and nearly 30% of the soldiers called to fight on the ground were, disproportionately so. So, it seems South Park is actually pointing out racism, not mocking those who suffer from it. What's uncomfortable might be that it does so through a joke, which can feel like mockery or disrespect, but laughing at something doesn't mean you don't take it seriously. Often, it's the opposite. Humor allows us to acknowledge something painful that we otherwise couldn't. Look, I'm not saying all the jokes in this show are defensible or that everyone has to like this kind of humor, and if you don't, the problem is you. Not at all. Don't misunderstand me. I completely understand that many people don't vibe with how South Park tackles certain topics, and that's okay. It doesn't have to appeal to everyone. But think about this. For many people who otherwise wouldn't stop to question or reflect on certain issues, some of these jokes might be exactly what makes them think. Sometimes, even uncomfortable humor can open a door that would otherwise stay closed. In Hell, Satan tries to have a serious conversation with Saddam, but he ignores him. He just wants to hook up. Tired, Satan walks away. Then Kenny, who's been watching everything, shows up. He tells him he doesn't have to keep putting up with this, that he deserves better. For the first time, Satan feels truly heard, thanks him, and decides to confront Saddam. He tells him he no longer wants his help to rule, but Saddam plays the victim, promising he'll change. Satan believes him and forgives him. Meanwhile, Stan, Carmen, and Kyle manage to find the mole. To their surprise, he's not an expert or a warrior, just a kid like them. Even so, they include him in the plan. The execution show for Terrence and Philip kicks off with a big spectacle. Winona Ryder shoots ping pong balls, and a dog named Jeppy does tricks to entertain the audience. Sheila takes the stage and addresses the troops. Remember, horrible and deplorable violence is okay, as long as no one swears. That's what this war is about. The kids manage to sneak into the event. Carmen has a key mission: disable the alarm so the mole can rescue the comedians. But just as he's about to do it, Kenny appears to him. He warns that Satan and Saddam are coming. Carmen panics, runs to tell the others, and forgets to turn off the alarm. The mole is discovered, guard dogs chase and attack him, and he's gravely injured and dies. Now the execution begins. Desperate, the kids try to reason with their moms. They tell Sheila that Satan and Saddam are coming, but she doesn't believe them. She gives the order to electrocute the comedians, and chaos erupts. Canada drops bombs on the stage. The U.S. responds with its army. Amid the chaos, Carmen manages to free Terrence and Philip, but with the electric shock, the chip implanted in Carmen starts to malfunction. The Mothers Against Canada see the disaster. They just wanted a cleaner, healthier world for their kids. No, this makes them doubt. They tell Sheila it's enough, that if they keep going, their kids could die. But Sheila doesn't stop. She stands with the soldiers right in front of Terrence and Philip, ready to shoot. Then Kyle steps forward, placing himself between his mom and the comedians, saying he won't move, that he won't let her eliminate them. The general tries to convince him, saying there are plenty of other silly movies he can watch, but Kyle responds that it's not about that. It's about freedom of expression, about being able to say what you think, even if some don't like it. As I mentioned earlier, the whole plot of Terrence and Philip being censored for swearing was a direct metaphor for the attacks and censorship South Park has faced since its inception. From the first episode, Trey Parker and Matt Stone have been accused of being vulgar, disrespectful, and offensive. They've faced criticism, complaints, hate mail, threats, and countless censorship attempts from religious groups, parent associations, and even governments. Countries like Mexico, Italy, and China have gone so far as to cut scenes, censor episodes, or outright remove the entire series from their television. But at its core, all these groups are doing the same thing Sheila does in the movie. They want to decide what can be said and what can't, what can be seen and what can't, who can speak and who must stay silent. They get outraged over superficial things like a curse word or an uncomfortable joke while ignoring much deeper, more serious issues. As we saw, while the whole town was tearing their hair out because the kids were swearing, they ignored that a child died brutally. And instead of asking what they were doing wrong as a community, they preferred to blame Canada or some TV comedians to avoid facing their own problems. And so, It showed how ridiculous it is to try to solve deep problems with superficial solutions. Censoring a word won't change the reality behind that word. That's why censorship and the so-called political correctness are sometimes not tools of justice, but forms of evasion. They only mask the unjust to make it easier to look at. They don't solve problems. They hide them so we don't feel uncomfortable. And hiding the uncomfortable only perpetuates it. They pretend that if no one says anything offensive, the world will be a more decent place. But that's false. The world doesn't improve because we stop saying bad words. The world improves when we're able to recognize what's broken and dare to confront it. And in that sense, as absurd as it sounds, South Park's jokes might be more useful for social change than the entire cancel culture combined. Because, even if they're crude or uncomfortably true, they don't shy away from difficult topics. On the contrary, they bring them to light. And by doing so with humor, they allow more people to start noticing those injustices, talking about them, questioning them, and in some cases, acting. Meanwhile, cancel culture does the opposite. It shuts down the conversation, eliminates the opportunity to debate and understand, and with it, closes the possibility of changing anything. What's more offensive? Saying a bad word or ignoring the real injustices happening while we're scandalized by that word? Censorship focuses on what's said. South Park focuses on what's hidden. And that's why, in a world where everyone wants to look proper, maybe we need shows that, even if they're uncomfortable, remind us that often, the truly offensive thing isn't what's said, but what's kept silent. Kyle turns to his mom and says, "When I got in trouble, you never talked to me. You just looked for someone to blame. Mom, stop fighting for causes." The soldiers fall silent. They know Kyle is right, but Sheila isn't willing to back down. She takes the gun herself and shoots. She hits the comedians in the forehead. They fall to the ground, and their blood spills. Stan freaks out and yells at the mother. Sheila, who just killed 2 men, tells him, "Young man, watch your language." The spilled blood fulfills the prophecy. Satan and Saddam emerge from the underworld and appear before everyone. They look straight at Sheila and tell her that by killing an innocent, she's opened the door to the end of the world. Sheila tries to justify herself. She just wanted a better world for the kids, but Saddam explains that with that good intention, she filled everything with intolerance and hate, and that's exactly what let them in. Saddam orders everyone to bow to him. Satan gets offended, reminding him that he's the true Lord of Evil, but Saddam just laughs and humiliates him in front of everyone. Then he turns to Carmen and calls him fat. Carmen gets angry and insults him. His chip sends a shock, but since it's malfunctioning, it hits Saddam. The light bulb goes off. Carmen starts spewing profanities one after another, and another shock hits the dictator. Now in pain, Saddam yells at Satan that he's useless to help him. But Satan's had enough, tells him it's over, grabs him, and throws him back to hell. Saddam falls onto a rock and dies, impaled. Satan finally feels free, turns to Kenny, and thanks him for opening his eyes. As a gesture, he offers to grant him a wish. Kenny asks for everything to go back to how it was before the war. They remind him that this means he'd still be dead. Even so, Kenny nods, says goodbye to his friends, and disappears. Satan cleans up the whole mess and takes it with him. The world calms down. Terrence and Philip come back to life, and everything returns to normal. Sheila hugs Kyle and apologizes for not being there enough. Kyle tells her, "After all, what saved us were Carmen's profanities." Suddenly, the kids look to the sky and see a bright light shooting up from the earth. It's Kenny, now with wings and a halo. His sacrifice for others opened the gates of heaven for him. And so, we return to the initial question. Why hasn't South Park been canceled after so many jokes that many consider offensive, after mocking everything and everyone? How is it still on the air? My opinion, as strange as it sounds, is that South Park hasn't survived despite cancel culture, but, in part, because of it. Why? Because we live in a world where everyone, on social media and off, tries to look proper, progressive, empathetic, and flawless, where sometimes seeming good matters more than being good. And South Park doesn't play that game. It stays brutally honest. It doesn't tell you how you should be. It shows you how we often are, selfish, impulsive, prejudiced, and full of contradictions, capable of being scandalized because a kid says a bad word but indifferent to that same kid's death, capable of demanding justice while ignoring the person who needs help right beside us, capable of saying we're compassionate while using religion to control others. And in the midst of so much correctness, South Park gives many people permission to drop the act, stop pretending, and laugh at their uncomfortable parts without having to apologize for existing. What do you think? Is South Park really a disrespectful show that should be canceled, or is it more of a necessary, uncomfortable mirror? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thanks so much for sticking around until the end of this video. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, you can do so now, and it would help me a ton. And I'll see you in the next one.